This is great. So Christina is going to be reading the questions, and she even has some like she even contributed to the list of 20 questions. After we go through the 20 questions, then we're going to dive into the list of goals that each young adult submitted, and we're going to give them some encouragement and guidance regarding the achievement of those goals.
This is a question from Claudia. She asked, if you have more credit card debt than you have in your savings, what is the easiest way to pay it off quickly?
Okay. Well, there's the debt snowball method where you list it out from the smallest balance to the largest balance, right? And you attack the smallest balance first. But then also there's the debt avalanche method, right? Where you list out your debts from the highest interest rate to the lowest interest rate, and you attack the highest interest rate first. But so there's different methods. I would say you want to research the different methods, choose a method that you feel works best for you, and then work that method. You want to be systematic in your approach, right? I personally love the debt avalanche method because, I'm a math person and I just feel like it makes more sense to try to attack the largest interest rates first. However, I understand that emotionally, you can build up momentum if you attack the smallest debt first, and you get those small wins, Tony, what are your thoughts?
Yes, that's Claudia, that's a great question. And Lance is absolutely right. Those are the two most common methods, the snowball method and also the avalanche method. And I think there's no right or wrong. Mathematically, you're going to pay less interest if you use the avalanche method versus the snowball method. Snowball method, as Lance mentioned, gives you a little bit more emotional wins along the way. And so that could be important to help you stick to the program because that's the most important part.
And just a quick kind of follow-up question. When we talk about interest rates, the APR percentage, is that the interest rate that you guys are talking about? That's like the math, like when you pay off the largest interest rate first or the lowest, is that APR, that interest rate? Is that what that means? Okay. Right. I just want to make sure I know my lingo right. Okay, great. Okay, let's go to the next one just to keep with time. This is a question from Heather. She says, how much do I need to save for retirement? I have a pension, but my district does not match my 403B contributions. How do I know what percentage to put in? So if you could also maybe, I'll direct this to Tony first. If you could define like what a 403 contribution is, that would be helpful too. I know for me, I'm new to the game of finance. So if you could help, what's the difference between a pension and a, 403B if there is, or, stuff like that.
So Heather, great question. The 403B basically is the same as a 401k, but usually for a nonprofit or a governmental agency, something like that. So they'll have a 403B, but in essence, it works the same as your 401k. So you put money there, and the money that's there that you put there and the money that is growing is all tax deferred. So that when you do take the money out at retirement, usually at least 59 and a half, then those contributions will be taxed at that point. And as far as the question in terms of how much you want to put aside, for years, the rule of thumb has been 10%. But I think with the way the economy is and inflation and those type of things, moving up higher than that is something that's probably very recommended. And using those vehicles that make it easy for you to save is very important. But start at 10 and then kind of work your way up.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to just add on to that is that, so I know Heather is in her 20s. She's a teacher, and she mentioned in her question that there's no matching for that 403B. And so my recommendation is for Heather to really look into perhaps prioritizing, maximizing, like maxing out your Roth 401k before focusing on the 403B, since it's not now. If it's matching, that's free money. So always prioritize the free money, right? But if it's not matching, then I think you might be better off by maxing out your Roth IRA. Because here's what I've noticed, and now there's different, 403Bs, but a lot of those 403Bs, there's a lot of fees involved, a lot of hidden fees. And when you compare it to, you work in a strategy where you're just directly opening up a Roth IRA and directly with Vanguard or Fidelity or whatever, then, I feel like, and especially if it's like an index fund, I feel like you can save a lot on the fees, Tony, what are your thoughts about that?
Lance, I absolutely agree with that. And Heather, at your age, you'll be able to put 6,500 a year into a Roth, and until you've gone beyond that, I certainly agree to doing the Roth IRA would be a better way to go, especially because on the back end, you'll be able to take those monies out all tax-free. And I also want to just kind of congratulate you because you do have a pension. There's not many pensions left around anymore. Usually only state, federal government employees have those. So the fact that you have a pension that's going to be to your benefit, and then if you can be disciplined and be able to put more money away in a Roth, you're just going to be a lot better off down the road.
Yeah. And just a little side note for everyone who hasn't, because I've heard that a lot of employers now, they're offering not only a traditional like 401k, but also a Roth 401k. And here's my thought. My thought is, if you're young and you're starting out in your career, it seems to me you should always go for the Roth 401k rather than the traditional 401k, because you're in a low tax bracket, and so you can really, so it's better to go ahead and pay taxes on the contributions now so that you don't have to pay taxes on it later, and it grows tax-free and everything.
So that's the difference between a Roth and a traditional. Is the Roth, you pay the taxes when you deposit the money or transfer it into the account.
Right.
And then when you take it out when you're of retirement age, it's already been taxed. You don't get taxed on that income.
Tax on the growth, you don't take tax. Yeah. So basically you're not able to, with a Roth IRA, you're not able to get a tax deduction now, but it'll be tax-free later. And so it seems like the only people that would really benefit from like a traditional 401k would be the people who are currently in a high tax bracket and they really need that tax deduction now.
I do want to say on the traditional 401k versus Roth 401k, just make sure if you do that, because many of the employers only match on the traditional side and they don't match on the Roth side. Yeah. And so put up to match, because as Lance said, that's free money, and we like FREE money. We like free money. So make sure you're taking advantage of the match, and then the very next dollar, I would be putting it into the Roth 401k if it's available. If not, I would be getting one on my own. Absolutely.
Gotcha. That's super helpful. Okay, great. So let's keep it rolling. This is another question from Heather. She asked, and I'll start with Lance on this one. When should you take out life insurance?
Okay. Now life insurance, that's a controversial, because there's a lot of different products and stuff and everything. And I think that, having this panel, you're going to see that there's different like perspectives on different products. Me personally, I'm of the mindset that if you don't have anyone that's depending on your income, then I would say focus on the Roth IRA, focus on the index funds, focus on real estate, because I just feel like you can kind of self-insure in a way. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know some people, like, if you don't, because, if something happens to you, then, you have wealth that's built up that can take care of funeral expenses and all that kind of stuff, But that's just my
absolutely. And that's a very common opinion. And, being in the insurance industry for 26 years, I do think it's important to have life insurance to cover any debts that you might have. You don't want to leave those things behind if you don't, student loan debt or those type of things.
Right. That doesn't just disappear, right? It goes to your next of kin
but honestly, if there's no cosigner on them, they would disappear at your death. Honestly, they would. If there's no cosigner, so there's no one for them to collect that from other than your estate. So if your estate has assets, then that's a different story. But I think that there are some things that life insurance can do. It is, I think, should be part of your portfolio, because it is a Class A asset. You know, even when you fill out an application, they ask you about your assets. They'll ask you about cash value life insurance. Now, the way you structure it could be completely different if you have no one depending on your income. And so it's another way to create a tax-free asset that you could use down the road, even prior to 59 and a half and those type of things. But I don't think that it needs to be probably the major thing that you do, but I do think it does play its part in an overall financial plan. But you just don't want some insurance person overselling you. Just, look at what you're getting. Does it make sense? And if it resonates with you, then there's some good benefits to do. But if it doesn't, then bypass it.
True.
That's
True.
helpful.
True. Here's the question though, just as a follow-up, is that there's so many different types of products in terms of life insurance, right? So what would you say, what would be advice regarding for young adults that just feel overwhelmed because it's like you got different types of vehicles? Would you say you want to look at, I guess one of the things is fees, right? And I guess, like you said, Tony, your personal situation, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and fees, and then also the other, what we call living benefits, things that could be included, that would include things like critical illness, chronic illness, some things that could be very important for estate planning down the road. Now, one of the things that I think is important is if you do this, now if you got debt and you're working on some other goals, then maybe the best thing to do is to get term, right? That has some conversion privileges that later you can convert because you reserved your health. And so you don't have to go through the health process anymore. Even if you get older, you don't have to go through that. So it maybe make more sense to get term if you have some other goals that you're working on. And so I think, again, it's a matter of balance and looking at, what makes the most sense for you. If you've maxed out your Roth and you said, now what do I do? Right? It could be one of those things that you do in addition to the other things that you might have in your financial plan, including real estate and stocks, bonds, those type of things as well. So, and I'm like Lance. I'm a big proponent of index funds because the fees are low. They're strategically, if you look at them over a number of years, the return is going to be there. And so, yeah.
Gotcha. So it sounds like a lot of the especially decisions for like retirement or sort of closer to the second part of a person's life is a lot about just prioritizing what you can manage now, and then that can also change over time. What your goals are financially can adapt over time. Obviously I hope to be in a different financial position than I am at 28 as I am at 48, but
Right.
so that's really helpful.
And also your responsibilities may be different too. I mean, so now you got mortgages that you need to make sure that you're covered. So there's, our financial plan is a living document. It changes as we change and as economic conditions change, all that. It's not like you put something in place at 20 and that's going to stay that way until you're 60. There's going to be a lot of changes that have to take place along the way.
This is actually the next question fits into that exact conversation. It's a question from Heather. Heather's got some really great ones. Is what are the pros and cons of opening a 529 for my children? So that's a perfect kind of segue into, I don't have any children myself yet, but I know that, I want to be financially responsible and set them up for the best success that I can when I do have children. So can you, I believe, Tony, we're on you to start on this one, but what a 529 is and again, the pros and cons of that for Heather.
Yeah, so 529 is a college savings program. And what it does, it allows you to put the money in the 529 plan. And if the money comes out for qualified educational expenses, then there's no taxes on the money. Qualified expenses include things like tuition, books, room and board, but some things are not covered, like your cell phone, spring break trip. Okay, that's not really qualified
It's a
expenses.
little bit of a stretch.
That might be a little bit of a stretch, but I was studying. It was a group study.
Right.
Just happened to be at Miami Beach. And so, those are the type of things where you have to be careful with the 529 plan is because there can be tax consequences and also financial aid consequences. And some of that depends on who owns the 529, who started it, and how it's being funded. And so there are some things that you really, but I personally believe that it's more important for the 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 parent to make sure that they have proper retirement plans in place. Because here's the thing. If you put money in a 529 plan and the child decides not to go to school, doesn't use that money, right? Now you've put money aside and it's not a retirement, right? So that they're the beneficiary of that plan. There are secondary ways to fund education. You can get a scholarship to go to school. There's no scholarship for retirement. You can get financial aid to go to school, but there's no financial aid for retirement.
That's a really
And
good way to put it. I had never thought of it that way.
and frankly, if you're using some of the things like a Roth IRA and those type of things, there's still some access to some funds that you could use to help with college. Life insurance, cash value life insurance is one, Roth is one. There's other ways that you can get it to some assets to help with college if you need to, but there's no secondary aid for retirement if we don't plan for that.
Good. That's good. And just to piggyback on that, I want to emphasize how not all 529 plans are the same. So just
Right.
like with anything, do your research. Don't rely on, other people, like really make sure that you're understanding what it's about. And also too, going back to the whole thing about the fees, right? Understand what are the fees that are involved and then really compare it. So I feel like a lot of times people, they don't want to deal with their finances, and so they just allow financial experts to make their decisions. And it's like, okay, it's good to get counseling and advice and have consultants, but make sure that you're dealing with people who have the heart of a teacher that will teach
Mm.
you and that will help you understand what you're investing in, because ultimately this is your money, so you want to understand what's going on.
That's
You want to be educated, right?
Exactly.
Yep. And with the 529 plan, it kind of finishing up on this, it is state specific. So if you start a 529 plan in the state of New York, that may not have the same benefits in California if the child decides to go out of state for school. So you have to
that's
look at all
really
those
helpful.
dynamics as well.
Yeah, and a lot of that I personally I didn't know it was state specific, things like that. That's super helpful. Just to like put it into perspective and how research is so valuable before making kind of decisions like that. Um, Now it looks like we're going to transition into a little bit more about personalized budgeting and things like that. And I know I personally have a couple of questions floating in here about that too. So the next question is from Claudia and says, are there resources you can use to personalize a budget for your specific needs? So Lance, we'll start with you on this one.
Yes, lot of great resources. Dave Ramsey's company has something called Every Dollar, and there's a lot of great resources. But one of the things I would say is that what I find to be very helpful is that just in knowing your numbers, track your financial spending by looking at your bank account, looking at your credit card statements, looking at your financial spending for like 2 months, and you'll see certain patterns, you'll see certain numbers. I think the first step is just to become aware of where your money is going, right? And then from there you can build some budgets and everything. But I feel like the main thing is just to track your spending, and then there's a lot of different apps online.
If I could rubber stamp that and say ditto, the first step is to track where your money is going. And sometimes budgeting can seem so overwhelming to people because they don't know where to start. Well, if you track your spending and know what you're spending in different categories, then now you know where to start. Now you have a starting point. Now you have a gauge. And if you could do that for 30 days, 60 days, that gives you a better gauge. And then it's an evolving thing. And the one thing that I think trips people up is the word budgeting. Budgeting, especially depending on your personality type, right? So people who are high I, that really like to entertain and that type of thing, budgeting can seem really constraining to them. Um, Whereas you have people who are, more a C personality that's really kind of numbers, spreadsheet type of person. They're watching every penny. I think the important thing is to make sure that kind of know yourself, know thyself, right? And then the other thing is sometimes we got to change just the wording. And if we change from budgeting to spending plan, for some people, that opens up a whole nother thing. It's like, I'm not budgeting, I just have a spending plan. I just have a plan of how I'm going to spend my money.
I
It's
like that a
a
lot.
spending
That's
plan.
super great. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes, I mean, for me personally, like nowadays there's all these, memberships and like monthly payments that come out of your checking account or whatever automatically, that sometimes those get like, you get overwhelmed by like, what am I even paying for? What's even coming out of my account? Like, I have a subscription to this magazine that I don't even really care about or whatever. I think that's a huge benefit to tracking it over like that, 60 days, 90 days, something like that, to be like, okay, what exactly are you paying for? And then if there's anything you can eliminate, that's like kind of an easy first step. Like, oh, I don't need that anymore. I can just cut that out or whatever.
Well, and the other piece too is, as Lance mentioned, talking about looking at your bank statement, your credit card statement, and then your Apple Pay store.
Mhm.
What are, because that may just hit your credit card statement as the Apple Pay store, but what was it for? Same thing with Google Play Store, all those. Sometimes those get buried in with everything else that you might be doing. So you got to kind of dig into those a little bit too.
That's
The food budget is one of the budgets that I think a lot of people struggle with, right? And I think that, Dave Ramsey is known for the envelope system. And I think that's very effective, right? To think about that. Like, if like, let's say that your budget is $400 a month for food, well, every week, take out $100 and have it with you, right? And then spend, when you go to the grocery store, spend using that cash instead of spending using the credit card, right? Because there's all these studies that show that when you spend with cash, you're more conscious of it, right? Rather than spending with credit card, right? You kind of actually see your limit that you've set for yourself, right? By spending with cash. So I would say that for the food budget, think about spending with cash.
super helpful.
And the other thing that's really dynamic about that, Lance, is that you can't do DoorDash with cash, right?
Yep,
So
I was thinking the same thing.
will create some more discipline when it's easy to pick up the phone, hit DoorDash. Now, okay, wait a minute, I can't do that because my spending is in cash. And one of the things, and Dave Ramsey's big on that, Crown Financial's big on that, is you know how they have the little recipe books with the accordion in. You could take those recipe books and you treat it like a wallet and have your
Mm,
different categories and have your different cash amounts in there.
That's how I originally learned how to budget. Like my family, like my parents had that system when we had our allowance. We had like little tabs that we would drop our money in. And that was the first
Exactly.
like level of budgeting that I had.
Still works.
Yeah. So there's a question kind of following the same thought process, a question from Thomas that I'll pose to you, Tony, of how do interest rates affect both the economy and my personal finances? So he says, I know that interest rates are the cost of borrowing money, but I don't understand how they are determined, what impact they have on the overall economy, as well as on my own savings, loans, investments, etc. So I know we touched a little bit on interest rate, but hopefully we can get a little bit more knowledge about that.
Well, the interest rates obviously have a huge impact on the economy and on our personal finances that are determined by the Federal Reserve when they meet and they determine what they're going to do with the federal interest rates. And oftentimes they're using interest rates to try to either slow the economy down or spark the economy. And so they're looking at it as a total economic um, package in terms of the United States and the impact of interest rates and what happened. But obviously, as consumers, that does affect us, whether we're talking about, what the cost to get a mortgage or buy a car or all the different things that it can affect, especially on the consumer lending side. So it certainly can have a big impact. Now, on the other side of that, it also, because interest rates do go up, it can create some opportunities like high yield savings accounts and these type of things. And I love Einstein that said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Now, what people miss is the second part of that. He says, he who understands it, he earns it. He that doesn't pays it.
Yeah.
And so it affects on both sides of the equation. And so we just want to just make sure that we're looking at those things, not borrowing. I don't believe in unnecessary debt, certainly unsecured debt and those type of things. That's where you see the highest interest rates. And the reality is, if you're doing those things, even in a low interest rate environment, you still pay a tremendous amount of interest.
Mm.
Mhm. That's powerful, powerful. And just to piggyback that, yeah, absolutely. It's like, interest can work for you or can work against you, right? And everything. And so, and Tony mentioned about high yield savings accounts. And I feel like that's one of the things that a lot of young adults are not aware of. Okay. So banks, not all banks offer it, but a lot of banks offer this thing called high yield savings accounts. It's savings accounts that pay higher interests, right? Because normally a normal savings account, regular savings account, I mean, you're paying like, 0.02% or something, you know what I'm saying? I mean, very, very low interest, one, like 1% maybe or something. But like, high yield savings accounts, like for example, Capital One Bank is their high yield savings account currently is over 4%. And so, as Tony mentioned about compound interest, you figure, over time, having a savings account that's paying you 4% instead of like 0.5%, that's going to be a significant difference over time. And now, we're going to get into later, we're talking about emergency funds and everything. The best
Sure.
spot for your emergency fund should be in a high yield savings account. And when you're thinking about what bank to go with, ask them about their high yield savings accounts. I think that's huge.
That's super helpful. Yeah, because I think when I think savings account, I sort of assume that they're all the same. So knowing that there's a difference in the interest that you can accrue with that savings account is super, super helpful. This question, I'm not sure who submitted this question, so I'm sorry I can't shout them out, but it says, should I start investing now or should I wait until I finish paying off my student loans? So Lance, let's start off with you on this
That's
one.
a big question. That's one of the most popular questions that come up with young adults, in our network, right, of dancers. And so what I'm trying to encourage them is that even if you have high, if you have high credit card debt and student loan debt, I really believe that you should get started in investing, even if it's just $50 a month. You can open up a Roth IRA index fund, and just do $50 a month even. And here's the thing. I really believe that once you start to invest, you start to take on the mindset of an investor. And I think so having a mindset having that identity, I think it's going to carry over to other things. I think it's going to help you to make better decisions subconsciously on purchasing stuff and all that and spending habits and everything when you're starting to invest. And also too, you guys are so young, right? I mean, this target audience, 25 is like the average age, right? You guys are so young, and even $50 a month over time is going to be an amazing, huge amount. Because you think about it, index funds, Roth IRA index funds, like an index fund that's tracking the S&P 500. I mean, historically is like around 10, 11%. And so if you just think about the compound interest, it's amazing. Like, for example, if you're 35 years, I wrote this down, a 35-year-old would need to invest $443 per month to reach $1 million by 65 at an interest rate of like 10%, right? Which is conservative, right? But if you start at 18, all you need to invest is $79 per month, So it's amazing how this is an example of how the earlier you start, the less amount of money you need to invest in order to reach that $1 million status, you know? And most of
That's
the people are
helpful.
around 20, 25. And so I would even say like, you know, $100, $150, $200 a month, you're going to be pretty much a guaranteed millionaire.
That's a really cool thought. And I just want to, before we go to Tony's thoughts, I think it's important, at least when I'm listening to what you guys are saying, is investing doesn't just mean like in the stock market or in like because I think I hear on the news there's, you know, oh, the stocks are up, the stocks are down, the, you know, this is going horrible and this is going great and all, you know, there's a lot of like volatility in the markets is kind of the phrase that sticks in my brain. So it's helpful to also know that like you're not just talking about like buying a stock for Apple, you're talking about the Roth IRA, you're talking about index funds that are a little bit more conservative when it comes to investment style. So that's really helpful to Tony. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts in regards to that as well.
You know, it sounds really sexy to say that I own Apple stock.
Right.
Right? That sounds really sexy. But the reality is that if you're getting the S&P 500, which includes all those things, you're going to be much better off in the long run, because instead of waiting for one company to be profitable, you have a group of 500 that you're following, right? And it's a very good, and I think it's a better indication than even than the Dow Jones, which is only 35 companies, right? So now you're talking about S&P 500. Specifically to this question in terms of if I should reduce debt or save, I don't think it's an either or. If I think it's both and you know, and then like if we're here like with debt and zero savings, if I reduce debt, I kind of move this way, right? But if I am doing both, I move this way, right? And so it widens, it creates more wealth quicker to do
Mm,
both and rather than just focus on one. And so what I would do is, it goes back to our earlier question, is decide how much money you want to put towards your debt elimination plan, whether snowball or avalanche, and then invest the rest, right? And so that you're actually working on both simultaneously. And there's something about watching your savings grow. There's you know, if watching my debt go away, that's exciting. But watching my savings, to be able to open up my app and see that I got $1,000 in savings,
yeah.
that does something different for you. And I do want to say this on the savings account too, is I'm all about getting a savings account at a bank across town and have no debit card, no access to it, so that it just grows
You can't mess with it. You can't think about it when you're, oh, I
absolutely,
really want these shoes or whatever.
and put it on automatic, because oftentimes when we get paid, we can take our paycheck and we can split it between different accounts. So split that so it happens automatically. You don't have to think about it. It's gone.
That is super helpful. And I'm thinking, because like I have a very type A personality personally, so I really get fixated on like one goal at a time. But I feel like what you guys have been saying through all these questions is thinking about your finances isn't just one thing at a time. Like it's actually better to kind of, for lack of a better thing to say, spread the wealth. And by, you know, kind of diversifying what you do with your money, if it's saving, if it's investing and all that. That's like one thing that I'm hearing sort of repeated in each of these answers is, you know, you do have priorities, but it's not always the greatest to just do, you know, tackle one thing at a time. Sometimes you can do a little bite-sized chunk or whatever out of a couple of different goals, which is helpful to hear.
And
So
to that
if I
point,
can lean,
quick,
oh yeah, I was going to lean on that a little bit, Christina. I think for someone who does like to focus on one thing at a time, is that you can do that. Let's say it's debt or savings. You can say, okay, I'm going to focus on saving, and then I put it in place, and then I put it on automatic pilot, and now I can move to the next item,
Mm,
and I can strategically do it that way. I don't necessarily have to do them like multitasking at the same time, but
one
put
can
this
be
in
kind of
place,
auto.
put it on auto, go to my next goal, put it on auto, go to my next one. that type of thing.
I love
That's
that.
helpful.
And then to piggyback on that, yes, make it systematic. Have a game plan. Have a game plan. And yeah, and speaking of priorities, I feel like the number one priority is get like $1,000 emergency fund as a, what I'm saying? Dave Ramsey talks about the baby emergency fund, right? So just think about priorities. I think because a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck and everything. I think if you just have $1,000, regardless of how much debt you have, just have $1,000 cash as a mini emergency fund, right? I think is goal one. And then goal two, I think, try to, work the debt snowball or debt avalanche and try to pay off debt and everything, And then I think, eventually you want to have an emergency fund of at least 6 months, right? I think, the whole COVID experience taught us about how, it's so important to have a rainy day fund, right? Because it's going to rain, right? And all that. And then, to really start to invest in a Roth IRA and all that. And so I feel like, it is important to have those priorities. And as Tony said, yeah, you can focus, but just have a game plan,
Yeah, definitely. The next question is actually one of mine. I am in the part of my life that I'm thinking about transitioning from renting to owning. So purchasing a home, all of that, obviously very new to the process. So my question is kind of open-ended in, what is needed? How do you know if you can afford to buy a home? What are the expectations to, get a mortgage or things like that? How do you know that you're financially ready to take on the purchasing of property, particularly a home that you're going to live in this particular question? I believe we're on Tony to lead it off, I think.
Christina, I think this is it's an excellent question, and it's one that many people are wrestling with now, especially because of the home prices being higher, interest rates being higher. Do I buy now? Do I wait? All those types of things. And I still think the sooner we can get into home ownership, the better, because we start to build equity, we start to build wealth there. I think what we have to be careful of is that we don't overbuy, right? Because I think that's always dangerous. And the system is almost set up to lean you towards that way. Because when we start talking about, debt to income ratios and all that, normally we're talking gross, right? But we don't bring home gross, we bring home net. And so, I think that we need to be careful with that. And one of the programs that I think is really good is it's called NACA. It's an excellent program because it takes you all the way through the home buying process. But what it does, it prepares you for it. It makes you get a budget. It makes you do these type of things. And many of my clients that I send to it, they never actually buy the home through them, but it prepares them for home buying. Now, I do teach this. There's a difference between being a home buyer and a home owner. Home buying is how do I get prepared to buy the house? But what we need to be prepared for is home ownership, because now that means maintenance, that means taxes, that means all the other things that come with owning a home. And, I think it's just a matter of just making sure you're ready to make that step, because there is those different aspects of it.
Before we go to Lance, what did you mean when you said overbuying? Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I think sometimes what we can qualify for with the mortgage companies and the institutions may not necessarily be what we should be purchasing, right? Just because we can afford it on paper doesn't mean that that's going to be the best for us. And
Gotcha.
so we buy a house that's too big or too expensive because we can afford it on paper, but you still have to live in it. And that, again, that's what I'm saying, home buyer versus homeowner.
That's helpful. Yeah. There is a lot of other expenses that I, don't necessarily have as a renter right now, of taking care of, like, the external part of the building. Again, like you were saying, the real estate taxes, the things like that you don't really think about when you see like a ticket price on a house. You have to think that plus all of this other stuff. So that's
the lawn and the,
right.
et cetera, et cetera.
Lance, do you have something to add?
Absolutely. I mean, so I was a mortgage loan officer. I was a real estate agent. And I've noticed that our culture tends to push home ownership, and I feel like I do believe that it is a blessing, but I do believe that unfortunately a lot of people are getting into buying a home incorrectly and prematurely. And for example, you know, these what do they call it? The down payment assistance programs. Okay, so I think you got to be careful, right? Because I believe that a lot of these down payment assistance programs are actually promoting poverty, because I feel as though if a person doesn't have enough, you know, capital, you know, savings to get into to cover some, you know, down payment costs or closing costs, you know what I'm saying? I feel as though they're putting themselves in a position that is dangerous. Now, I believe that there are a lot of cases where the down payment assistance programs have really helped people, and that's great. But I also believe that it has been a hindrance for a lot of people because they're getting into home ownership prematurely, not having the right skills. But I do believe like programs like NACA, because NACA is great because they give you a counselor, and the counselor makes sure that you are ready, and they're going to look at your budget and everything, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's just, you know, it's a situation kind of going back to anything, you know, really understand what's going on, understand the costs that are involved, and just make sure you're making decisions based on, you know, wisdom instead of based on emotion. I feel like people get emotional about real estate, and that's where you can lose a lot of money, you know? So,
That's
Yeah.
helpful. Um,
So,
this question is from Paulette, and it's sort of the other side of the coin of she's asking, she says, I have very little capital. How can I start investing in real estate? So not necessarily a house that you're going to live in, but having real estate as part of your sort of portfolio. How do you do that when um you don't have very much capital at the moment or on hand or whatever the case may be? Lance, we'll start with you.
I mean, one idea, and I'm a big proponent of being prepared, right? Having emergency fund and everything, right? So I would be very cautious of like trying to get into real estate if you don't have, you know, a rainy day fund, right? But something to think about, there are mutual funds that are like REITs, there are mutual funds that invest in real estate. And so you can kind of, get into investing in real estate through mutual funds even, as an idea.
That's cool. Yeah, I never knew that that was like a concept. So that was really interesting. Yeah. Tony, do
yeah,
you have anything to add?
like a RIT, those type of thing. I, I do think, again, if you don't have the capital, I think you have to be very, very careful about, and my concern is that you see a lot of stuff on social media about owning real estate and multifamily dwellings and all these type of things. That's a lot to take on as an individual, but if you're doing it with a group of people, and I think some of the things that Lance and his family's done, I have so much respect because they're collaborating, they're coming together to do these things, and I think that is a way to go. And again, if you don't have the capital to do it, you know, now you're talking about if, there's a plumbing issue or HVAC or whatever might happen. Now you as a landlord or a owner, you're responsible for getting that done for your tenant. And if you don't have the capital to do it, it could put you in a very awkward position.
That's helpful. Yeah. Again, I really liked Lance what you said about, and I think Tony, you reiterated this, like being prepared and not, jumping into, don't jump in with both feet if you're not prepared to do so, kind of a thing. So that's helpful.
Well, and I think in this area of home ownership and buying real estate is that we all have said, we have this American dream, right? The American dream is to have a, 3-bedroom house with a white picket fence and et cetera, et cetera. And we've bought into that. But if we're not prepared, that American dream could very quickly turn into a nightmare.
Yeah,
And so just make sure that we're ready for it. So, yeah.
And
that's helpful.
just to add something, here's something I suggest. A lot of young people I notice they have roommates, when they're getting apartments, and in college they had roommates. Well, one thing I want you guys to consider, right, is house hacking, the concept of house hacking. House hacking is a powerful strategy where you can buy a house, you can live in, one part of the house, and rent out the other portion. And that rent that you're getting from the other portion can help you with the mortgage. In some situations, the rent that you're getting, maybe if you're renting by the room, or if you're doing Airbnb, short-term rental or medium-term rental, then you could set yourself up in some situations where the rent that you're getting is covering the mortgage, and so I think that we want to look at things very and really think of different strategies to be able to get into real estate, but to really make it think more like an investor instead of a retail home buyer.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I never even really thought about that, but that's a really good point, Lance. I like that idea. Tony, were you going to add something?
No, I was just saying
Oh,
that's really good. I got clients who've done that, and I mean, he uses his house as an Airbnb, and when his house is being used, he packs up his bag, and goes lives with mom for the weekend, and then comes back. So
that's
yeah.
so cool. Yeah. So I know we only have about 20-ish minutes left, so I'm gonna try and combine a couple of questions that are along the same topic, just so that we can kind of keep the conversation going. A couple of different questions from Paulette, from Taisha, are talking about business expenses. So, or just business related financial information. So, Paulette asked specifically about how can I track my business expenses, and kind of the importance of separating business expenses from personal expenses. And then also Taisha brought up building business credit for things that you may have expenses but don't have the income quite yet to sort of shell out right off the bat. So if you can, I think we're going back to Tony on this one. If you can kind of give us some advice on if you have, a side hustle or you're trying to start a business, how to kind of navigate in that space.
Well, Paul and Taisha are really hitting it right on, because I do think I'm a big proponent of entrepreneurship, right? Even if it's not your full-time job, but sometimes entrepreneurship means I have that side hustle, but we want to run it as a business. And I'll take the first part of it in terms of the tracking your business expenses. And I think Lance would be awesome at the credit piece, is that you definitely need to separate your personal and your business expenses. We say this: you and your business are one, except when it comes to your bank accounts, right? And so we do need to separate those. I do like QuickBooks Online. I think it's a very affordable way to keep track of your business expenses. But I think it is vital, because if you ever get audited and you are crossing and have all those lines gray, that could be not a good position to be in. And there's so many wonderful write-offs for owning a business, especially an at-home business or a business that you work from your home, in terms of write-offs of different expenses that you're paying anyway. You're going to have to pay your rent. You're going to have to pay your electric bill, your cell phone bill. So if you have a side hustle, make it a business, keep track of those expenses, and then be able to write off those things. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes new business owners make, is they commingle their business funds and their personal funds together.
Absolutely. I always am encouraging our dancers, our dance fitness instructors, to start that business, because the moment you start a business, you can immediately start to write off a portion of those personal expenses. As Tony was saying, some of your personal expenses become business expenses, a portion of your cell phone, your home office expense, your mileage when you're traveling to and from gigs and stuff, so that's amazing. And with the business too, the whole thing about the business credit is such a powerful tool, because when you build business credit, right, it's its own entity. And with business credit, you can start to take out loans, right, to make investments, and the loans won't show up on your personal credit report, and so it's like a lot of different ways that you can start to leverage when you have a business, and yeah, QuickBooks Online, as Tony mentioned, I love that. And for those that are just starting out and everything, having that business bank account, that can kind of really help you track, because you can say, okay, I'm gonna have this business bank account and I'm only going to put in my business income into the bank account. I'm only going to take out business expenses, or whatever, so.
That's actually really great, sort of leads into a question from Ashley that she was asking about how she can track her business mileage. I know that was one thing you both kind of mentioned as far as a personal expense that may sort of trickle into a business expense. She also asked about how 1099s work. Do I need to report income if I don't receive a 1099? So that's sort of a piece of the business expenses versus reporting for tax purposes. So Lance, can you give us a little bit of detail in that, and then we can kind of move to Tony if he has any extra thoughts.
So a W-2, when you have a regular job, right, you get a W-2, right? And they've already taken out they've already withheld some taxes, right? But when you are a 1099 employee, your clients are not taking out any taxes. And so you have to report that income and you have to pay taxes on it. And in fact, if it's a lot, right, then you need to even do quarterly taxes even, right? But with the side hustles, especially if you have a regular job, a lot of times you can just, get away with just paying your taxes at the end of the year. But here's the thing, and here's a very big misconception, right? Some people think that, oh, well, if I don't get paid, if I don't receive a 1099, do I still need to report the income? Well, here's the thing, is that technically, you need to report all income that's received, all income, right? And everything. Now, if they don't give you a 1099, that means that they didn't report to the IRS that they gave you the money. And so if you don't, report it, then the IRS won't know that you received it, right? However, from an ethical standpoint, I encourage everyone to report your income, and also too, you think about this, I mean, not only from an ethical standpoint, but also from a standpoint of when you want to go to apply for business, for more business credit and apply for different things, having tax records that show that you earned a lot of income is very beneficial, so something to think about.
And that's the dynamic of it. The dynamic of being a entrepreneur is that you do have a lot of write-offs. That the catch 22 in that is that when you do have those write-offs, you're showing a lower income for the things that Lance is talking about when you go to get a house and those type of things. So I'm also a proponent of putting yourself on a payroll, right? To have income that you show that way. In terms of also with the business mileage part, a lot of the programs, even the QuickBooks, it has an automatic thing that you have on your phone. It'll track those mileage. It'll pop up and ask you if this is a business trip, those type of things, to keep that so that you have that log for the IRS if you're ever audited and those type of things. And again, the 1099. The other thing I wanted to mention about it is that we also have to know that the IRS is catching on to a lot of those things, right? So now, because things, if you're using like Cash App to receive payments and those type of things, if you're receiving more than $600, which is the IRS threshold, now they're required to give you a 1099, even though the individual who actually cashed you that money did not. The Venmo or the Cash App or PayPal or whatever you have to be using, if you're receiving more than $600, and they push this back a couple times in terms of requiring that to be done by those cash transactions, but that's why there's either other ones coming up now called FedNow, is the Federal Reserve's version of Cash App. And so they're really getting onto it. So you might as well be in the habit of doing it. And as Lance says, ethically, I mean, we should be reporting that stuff as income.
That's helpful, yeah, because I think the sort of onset of all of those different apps and things like that, you forget that there is sort of the secondary due diligence that you need, especially if you're, conducting business with virtual transference of money. It's not someone just handing you cash in your hand. I think that's really helpful to just kind of put it back in perspective of like, it may not be right in front of you, the, consequences or ramifications, but it can sort of inform things down the road when you want to expand your business, or you're looking for credit or things like that. So that's really helpful to kind of bring that back. Myself included, I'm growing, sort of my own business little by little. So that's helpful.
Quick tip, and I want to say this is probably not totally the correct way to do it, but it's something that I've gotten in the habit of doing, is that every time I get gas on the receipt, I always get a receipt, and I put my odometer reader right on my car, like how much mileage on my car. And then that way I have all these receipts throughout the whole year, right? 2-3 times a month, I have these receipts, and I can actually calculate how many miles I drove per month even, and everything, right? And so what I do is I keep those receipts, and also on my calendar of all my speaking gigs or dance gigs or whatever, I have like the address that I drove to. So I kind of have that documentation that, okay, I have these business miles, I'm driving for business. And then I'm able to calculate an average of what I drove for the year. And then a lot of times what I do, I just take a percentage and say, okay, well, 80% of it was business, so I'm going to take 80% of the yearly business miles, and then I'm going to use that as my business miles, but I know that it might not really be the accurate way of doing things. But I wanted to ask Tony, what do you think about that? Like, if someone just kind of
I thought that was a great idea. It's simply, even from the mindset standpoint of writing the mileage down on the gas receipts. And then most of these apps that we're talking about, they have the scanning ability where you can just take a picture of the receipt, and now you have electronic documentation of those, and you have this category called gas and mileage, right? So those are all good, because the fact is that if you ever audit it, you need to be able to tell the story, and you need to be able to have evidence of that story. And I think that's good.
Definitely. That's super helpful. So Lance, if it's okay with you, we've got about 5-6 minutes left. I thought we could move into the financial goals. I don't know if you want me to lead off with mine. I have a couple from other people that have submitted. What's kind of your...
So here's the mindset of this. And Tony, basically, we got all the young adults to give us their short-term financial goals. And now these are short-term financial goals, meaning these are financial goals that they can achieve within 1 week. And we're going to have accountability, because so we are paying the young adults to participate in this program. And so basically they don't get paid until they do a follow-up video explaining how they have achieved those short-term financial goals. And so the purpose of what we want to do right now, real quick, is so Christina's going to read their financial goals one by one, and we're just going to give them some advice, guidance on how to achieve that within 1 week.
Right. Perfect. Okay. So, let's start with Paulette, because hers are a little bit, are very business, heavy, which is, I know, what we just talked about. So she has goals, for over the next week to get a business plan together, register her business, and maybe you guys can kind of give some advice about that. Get an EIN. I don't actually know what that means, so that would be helpful if you can kind of describe that. Open a business account, and then getting a business credit card. So though I know some of those are sort of combinable, but if you have any advice on sort of the beginning steps for Paulette to get her business started.
Well, I think those are great goals, and some of it will depend on the type of business that you're starting. If it's a sole prop or if it's an LLC, it may take you longer than a week. But getting your EIN, opening a business account, those things can happen pretty quickly, because you can get an EIN, which is a employee ID number. It's like your social security number for your business. You can get that almost instantaneously from the IRS website. And also registering your business and those type of things, depending on, again, the business entity that you start. But I think that first one, man, Paulette, that's it right there. Write the business plan. Man, once you have that, everything else will fall into place.
Yes. And just to piggyback on that is that, Google and YouTube are such powerful resources. And so you get stuck on like, because there's different types of business plans, structures. And so Google it and go on YouTube and, you get some ideas on how to do that business plan.
Yeah, like a template or something that's helpful. Yeah. Um, let's see. I'm gonna combine some of my goals with Taisha's goals. And also it looks like Serena has some similar goals as well of sort of better understanding our own personal finances. So printing out or researching what my credit report is, writing a monthly budget, writing out your financial goals, and then also opening a Roth IRA sort of as a first step of like an investment, strategy or things like that. So those are kind of, we did the business side of things. Now let's talk a little bit about more personal finance and how we can be the most successful with that.
Great thing about it is that a lot of these things is free. Like to get a copy of your credit report is absolutely free, right? You go on now, the only website that is officially endorsed by the United States government to give us our free copy of our credit report, right? One from each bureau, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, is annualcreditreport.com, right? So you can go on annual, I believe everyone should do this at least, once every 6 months or so, or whatever. And, during COVID, they changed the rules where they said that, hey, you can get it one free copy every week. Now, I don't know if they've gone back to the original way of, once a year. It might still be the thing where you can get it once a week for free, but annualcreditreport.com, print out your credit reports, look at your credit reports. Most likely there might be some minor errors, somewhere, but just for you to be aware of your credit report is huge, So you want to do that. And also a lot of the banks will give you your credit score. Now, keep in mind, a lot of them are using a Vantage score and not the FICO score, but it should be around the same ballpark, right? But yeah, take advantage of those free resources to stay on top of your credit report and your credit score. A lot of people wait until they're in the process of buying a home to start to think about their credit score. No. We should be doing this starting at age 18. We should be thinking about our credit because it takes time to really get a high credit score. And here's my goal in terms of credit score. Try to get at least a 760. Because they say, like I know in the mortgage industry, if you have at least a 760, then you qualify for the best rates, Now, of course, there's the credit report that they look at too and all that stuff, but 760 is a really, really great credit score to aim for.
That's helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I would ditto on that in terms of, getting your free credit report. I'm a big proponent of writing your goals. I mean, I think there's several there was, write out a business plan, write out your financial goals, write out a budget. I think those things are all important. And again, I think one of the keys is to start tracking. The tracker gets what the tracker tracks, right? So, that is probably vital that you start tracking, and then you start to put all those other things together. So I think these are awesome goals. And man, I can't wait to see the end results.
I know I'm motivated. Obviously it's hard sometimes when you're thinking of all of this in your own head, but hearing the two of you sort of provide your own perspective and being able to give, your own sort of advice from your own experiences and also just being, more familiar with the entire landscape of finances is not only comforting, but also extremely motivating. So I just really appreciate you both coming on and answering all of these questions for myself and my friends and all of that. I think this has been extremely helpful for me, and I feel like much more comfortable moving forward to reach those goals that I've set for myself in the short term and in the long term. So I thank you guys so much for this. This is great.
My pleasure. Thank you, Christina, for coming on. Thank you, Tony Jackson, the Real Money Coach, from coming on. I'm gonna let Tony, close us out with just some final words. And those of you who might not be familiar with Tony, he has an amazing resource. Please check out. Tony, please make sure that you include your website and information about your show. So amazing. And so I appreciate you, Tony, for taking time to come out. And just some final words from me. and I'm gonna turn it over to Tony, is this. You know, there's a quote that I heard, and it's really, really powerful. It says, rich people, you know, or put it this way, you get rich by doing the right things, but you get wealthy by owning the right things. And, you know, in our culture, especially with the sports and entertainment, you know, we've seen a lot of people get rich by doing the right things, having certain types of abilities and all that kind of stuff. But you don't really get wealthy until you own the right things. And so we're talking about Roth IRAs, we're talking about businesses, side hustles, we're talking about real estate. And, you know, because we're trying to say it's the assets that is going to really help you to become wealthy. It's not about trading your time for money, you know, it's about owning the right things. And so I just want to leave you with that thought that, you know, you get rich by doing the right things, but you get wealthy by owning the right things. And final words from Tony Jackson.
I don't know what I can add to that. I mean, that's pretty good there.
That's a
Place,
mic drop
that's
statement.
right? So here's the thing, Christina, I think that you did a wonderful job moderating this conversation, because as you can see, Lance and I both can talk, right? We both can go on these topics, and we're so passionate about it. And Lance, I hats off to you, man, for what you're doing in this space. We need all hands on deck, because we live in a country that has over, you know, $35 trillion of debt. Consumer debt is on the rise, and you know, we're living in a time where financial education, financial literacy is just not where it should be. And I don't know that it ever has been where it should be, but certainly these type of platforms are very, very important. So I just want to encourage everyone to continue seeking the knowledge, right? Seeking, you shall find. What we look for, we find. If we're looking for success, if we're looking for, you know, what to do, we'll find what to do. We'll find those things. So just continue to seek, and I believe that the Lord will bless you, and you'll find exactly what you're looking for.
Love that. Love that. And one more thing, Tony, how can people connect with you online?
Well, it's everything at The Real Money Coach. I tell people today, you want to know something about me, just Google Tony Jackson, The Real Money Coach, and it'll come up. That is at The Real Money Coach on Instagram, TikTok, all the social media handles, Tony Jackson, The Real Money Coach, and you'll find me. And the website is The Real Money Coach website, YouTube, The Real Money Coach. And so I'm not trying to hide, I'm out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Thank you guys so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.